Hi, and welcome back to the Lifestyle Show with me, Pam Joseph, in my, whether I call it my humble abode. We're all doing this remotely. It's all good, keeping up the directions, government directions for the COVID, so distancing. Great. Now, at this point, I'm going to make a little speech here. Away from COVID crisis affecting the entire world, one issue that's practically almost pushed the pandemic aside. The brutal, racist and tragic death of 46-year-old George Floyd in Minneapolis in the States while being detained by 4 police officers on the 25th of May. Now, it's made headline news across the globe, and protests and marches have also been taking place, many of which have been more or less peaceful, but with a very clear message: Black Lives Matter. So I'd really like to hear your views and any questions you'd like to ask our guests in the second half of this segment. So, you can do that through the YouTube channel, MediaNet.com. Also, lifestyle, email lifestyleonben, all one word, lifestyleonben@hotmail.co.uk. Get your messages and comments through that way. See, Anthony Jordan.
Hey.
Where are my guests?
Incoming. To be fair, with the protest going on and everything going on, and I believe there's also some other panels and discussions going on, we do have a slight delay in people coming in. But yes, there is myself, who is very, very willing to discuss. And again, guys, if you are watching on Facebook, if you are watching on YouTube, please, the MediaNet Live, just chat in there, just type it away. You've seen comments coming up. Thank you to everyone who has done that. Join in. We will interact with you as much as possible. That is just the truth of the matter. So first of all, can I just say a big shout out and thank you to Beresford, one, for some really positive messages that were there, but also equally for the fact that I am looking forward to what will be coming next, as the entertainment corner side of it. We've had this relationship before. It's back, and I am not taking my foot off the gears on this one. I am looking forward to bringing music together, entertainment together, and that is the way. Most definitely. Pam, you touched on the subject of the George Floyd, the matter of Black Lives Matter, and it's big, it's huge. As I've said at the top of the show, I've had some severe discussions going on, and some people really seem to believe that by seeing Black Lives Matter, they don't understand. They want to know, where is all lives matter? In order for all lives to matter, Black lives need to matter. It's all on an equal platform to anyone who's watching and doesn't understand it. That's what it's about. That is the mission that this is about, is that once there is one sector, be it Black, be it any other nation, that are suffering, that are not getting equal treatment, then a movement has to rise. And that's why this is here at this moment.
Sorry, you know why I keep looking towards my slide? Because the questions are popping up on the Lifestyle on Ben email. So no. I keep
by all means.
Oh, that's another one. So they're building up already as we speak. So there's comments and questions. So I'm just looking at that, and I'm really glad.
No. This is the pleasures of life. You get me.
You know what I mean? It's great that people are touching base on this. It is a huge thing. But many people have been, sort of like making their comments and speaking to me, whether that's on the road, whether that's, people that I know and calling me and what have you. And to be honest with you, there are 2 ways here. You're either going to get positive feedback on what's happening in the UK. They do have concerns about the US, but I think people are more focused on the UK. They want to know about what's happening here. What are we going to do about it here? Right. So you get well, what is the point? Some people will say about these protests, is it really? And then some people will say, no, we need it. And then we need to persevere with that. So, at the end of the day, let us keep trying to find out what the people want and what they think about what's going on. I do believe now we have retired Metropolitan Police Superintendent Dr. Leroy Logan, MBE, who is now on the platform. Yeah. So there we are. Hello there, sir. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not too bad at all. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I don't know whether you heard anything we was talking about just now. We've been asking people since yesterday to send in their comments, to send in their questions about this. So on the second half of this segment, we are going to sort of like come out with the questions and with the comments of people, across the UK. And can I say that looking at the screen, there's quite a lot of questions and comments to be made. hopefully we are going to be joined before we do finish this segment by Patrick Vernon, social commentator and campaigner. We're going to be joined by MP for Leicester East, Claudia Webbe, and also youth mentor Louis Howell. But for now, Leroy, can I say thank you ever so much again, and let's talk about this. There's a lot of issues here, and I'm looking at the ramifications of George Floyd's death to impact on race relations here in the UK. Talk to us about that. How has it impacted on race relations in the UK?
Well, I think it's laid bare a lot of the systemic failures and institutional racism in particular around not only policing, but other public services where they have lost trust and confidence. And in particular, the Black community feel that they are not served by a lot of these institutions, including policing. They feel they're treated with a lack of respect and dignity. And as a result of that, they think, really, you know, this is not an organization for me. And they disconnect, and it needs to improve. And, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, this George Floyd incident will say, listen, once and for all, we'll get the leadership from central government, we will get leadership from the mayor, the Home Secretary, to get a grip of these systemic failures through institutional racism once and for all. And no, don't take us for granted. Don't undermine us, undermine our intelligence or anything like that. Just get on and deal with this, as we thought it was going to happen in 1999 when the publication of the Macpherson inquiry started to get to grips with some of these things. But over the 20 years, it's been diluted. You know, racism and equality has been kicked off the agenda. In fact, it's been kicked into the gutter. And so it's brought it all back. I'm glad to see people of all backgrounds and ethnicities coming together, just like the one who are going to fight the National Front. I remember in the 70s, black and white, unite and fight the National Front. And I think that's what's going to happen almost 40 years later. And let's hope for the best.
I mean, I was reading some of the comments that I've just seen there, Leroy. People are talking about what difference is this going to make? You know, after the riots with, you know, the Duggan death and the Tottenham kicked off and, you know, it went across the UK, if you will. But, you know, they're asking that question. But, you know, we deal with that in another moment. But as a former police officer, one of the things that I've heard people say is that what we saw there, what the police officers did to a black male, we know that that does happen over here. So could this be the turning point in the training of officers in the British police force? Now, for them to sort of turn the screw, if you will, and retrain, or, you know, new trainees come in and adapt a new way of approaching and questioning black males in the UK.
You know, there's nothing in training that makes a cop racist. What a lot of this comes from is from how they're brought up and how they look at people of color, and in particular black men, and how they fear them, because that's a lot of it. And as a result of that, you need to make sure your recruiting process filters out those very negative racist cops. And, you know, they're very good at cloaking it in, you know, I want to keep the peace and help people and be a service to all backgrounds. But once they get into the culture of the organization, they assimilate, and a lot of them are into this control power trip. And that's why these heavy-handed incidences occur time and time again. For the most minor of offenses, whether it's a traffic offense or antisocial behavior, it's very hands-on. And I used to make sure that my officers were sanctioned if they did not do what they're supposed to do. The other thing is, once you get them in the organization, they need to have proper leadership, supervisors, sergeants, inspectors with the right ethical leadership to hold them to account, right? You don't want, as I call them, constables with stripes, or basically sergeants who let the constables do anything they want. So you need to have proper supervision and leadership, and make sure that the training they got in their foundation course is used properly, and all their actions is proportionate and necessary, and it's not gung-ho, seeing red through the blue lights and sirens. And as a result of that, you want independent oversight of all aspects of what they do. And a lot of that came through the McPherson inquiry in 1999. I gave evidence to say that the police service was institutionally racist, and their recommendations, and I know that was reviewed last year by a Home Affairs Select Committee. So I'd like to think they can resurrect that report, check how this organisation, the police and other institutions like the Crown Prosecution Service, etc., and start to get to grips with this. So it can be done relatively quickly if you get the leadership from the top, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and the Mayor. Yeah.
So again, then going on that side of it, is it all about sort of like lobbying, you know, and doing that in the same sort of like, you know, the way that, you know, the Lawrences did their, you know, conducted themselves, you know, more, rather than the sort of like, you know, militant, you know, approach to it. You know, do you think we ought to be doing this on the basis of, you know, that's what they like, let's do what they want, let's lobby, let's get petitions going on, let's reach to the Houses of Parliament, into the Lords as well, to start getting, you know, looking at legislation as well and things like that?
Well, I think lobbying has been done since we've been in a position to really lobby on having black MPs and people in authority. So that's going on, I would like to think. But in all honesty, it's when there are drastic actions taken, it gets the attention of those in the powers that be. You know, after the Lawrence inquiry in '99, we had the Duggan issue. And of course, the riots got the attention of the Prime Minister and the Mayor, Boris Johnson, as was then. And David Cameron and Boris Johnson came up with this feral youth and all violence is gangs. And, you know, when they start talking about gangs, they're always talking about black people. So as a result of that, it was quite clear that they didn't get it. And then it went into this false narrative that all violence involved gangs. And so, you know, the narrative took time to be eroded. And it's only when Boris decided to step down as mayor that they came out clean and said, this violence is down to crime and not just any black person, that to stop. So in all honesty, we've got to change that narrative. And so the lobbying has to be changing the narrative, owning the narrative, because we don't want to have violence, but I can understand why it happens. I mean, I was at the march on Wednesday.
Leroy, at this point, let me just get in the few other guests that's coming. Just 1 moment, keep a pin there. Claudia Webbe, MP Leicester East, has joined us. Hello, Claudia. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. We had Leroy Howell's youth mentor. He was there a moment ago. Can we get him back on? But at this point, we were on this point, Claudia, if you just came in when Leroy was responding to a question that was put in about, should we go through to the lobbying stages? Is that the way to go? And he was responding in that way. Do continue. Hello there, Louis. Thank you for joining us. At this point, we're still dealing with the, you know, the question put forward about lobbying and going through it that path. And Leroy, would you like to continue?
Yeah. So as I said, there is a time and place for lobbying. Lobbying has been done, and we've got to hold people to account and let them do the job they're supposed to do with the independent oversight, because you can't just leave the police to monitor themselves like they've been doing for the last 10 years. You need to have people who will say, listen, why do you do the things you do, and why is the impact? And obviously, it's not just about how many stops they do, it's what is the impact on trust and confidence? Because the cornerstone of police legitimacy is trust and confidence. So you can't just do stops for the sake of it. It has to be intelligence-led. So all of those checks and balances have to be in place. And I truly believe we can get a critical mass of organizations to really go behind even Operation Black Vote and what they're doing about the race equality strategy that I was one of the co-signatories of, to really hold organizations to account, including the police.
Including the police. Okay, at this point, Claudia, let's bring you in at this point. Yeah, I mean, lobbying is one way, protesting, marching, peaceful mind is another way. What else can we push out there to get changes and proper changes going on?
Well, first of all, let me just say for the record that I stand, of course, in full solidarity with the family, friends, and community of George Floyd, Minneapolis, and those of us in the UK. Obviously, we cannot ignore yet another death of an unarmed black man in police custody, and nor can we ignore the racial inequalities that exist in our country. So I'm glad that you are raising this issue today in terms of this subject, because we know that these protests continue, and as organized by Black Lives Matters and others, these protests on the streets continue, and despite the risks that it poses in terms of people's lives. And of course, it was the George Floyd lynching that brought people. But of course, we know that that's not what's just keeping them on the streets. And why people remain on the streets is because, as probably has been said already, that knee remains on our necks, and until that knee comes off our necks and enables everybody to have the opportunities, then we cannot end the kind of protest and demand that we are making in terms of racial justice and tackling those racial inequalities in a whole range and sphere of our lives, whether that's housing, education, the criminal justice system itself. You know, those inequalities cannot continue to exist where we continue to fare worse as African, Caribbean, Asian communities, as Black communities, where we continue to face worse in this. And so what we do need is we do need change. And obviously there is a role to play for Parliament in terms of bringing about that change. It's about change in terms of the systems, the processes, and the legislation that keeps people down. And therefore we have to, it is about systemic and structural change that people are looking for. And I think that that's right, and we have to keep the pressure on, because we are coming into a deep recession, and we know from previous recessions what that has meant for Black communities and how we fare in those recessions. And so it's really important that we keep the pressure on until we get change, because no change happens without demand. And that's why I think it's right that people make those demands. And so I'm looking forward in thinking that those changes are very straightforward and simple. No longer can we be in our inner cities and see institutions run in terms of the decision making of those institutions continuously run without the voices of Black communities. Too many times in the seniority of decision-making bodies, we don't see any Black faces at all, even when you have cities which are as diverse as my own constituency of Leicester and Leicester East, or in London. The decision makers are not diverse and reflective of those cities. That has to change. The other big change that is needed is in the media. The way that our voices are represented is not proper. We are not properly represented in the way that we should be represented in terms of the media. So the media is in a sense is a body that is basically misrepresenting us and not reflecting the true essence of us as Black people. And that change will not happen until not only the decision makers, but the production, the design, the output and the outcome reflect our communities, and that we've got more people employed in those bodies and on those trusts and those boards making those decisions. And then the other greatest big change is what we need in Parliament. We've made significant steps, of course, in having more representation of Black communities in Parliament, but it's still not enough, still doesn't reflect the population at large. And so we do need the changes there as well. Now that's what I call in effect the three nexus of power that needs to change. But beyond that, we need to see systemic and structural changes so that it is, we've been through this crisis, this coronavirus crisis, and we must now know, the society must now wake up to the fact that it's not the billionaires or the wealthy that are people that we rely on, but it's the nurses, it's the care workers, it's the checkout attendants, it's the cleaners. Those are the people that we rely on, and it has to be just that these people are given a proper and decent wage that people can live on. They're given proper rights and recognition, and that is what needs to change as well. Because
just bring in the voice in here, because we've got Louis Howells. Are you still with me, youth mentor Louis Howells? Can we get another side of the coin here with the youth mentality out there? What's happening? We saw on the videos and on the films that we see a lot of young people are on these marches and protests, very young people. So I want Louis, can you hear me, Louis, to come in on this and to talk about what you're hearing on that aspect, because we get it every time, don't we? That it's the students, it's the young people, and they're the ones really trying to come in and make a change. Louis, can you hear me? Louis, can you hear me? Oh, he's very static there. Hiya, can you hear me? Okay, let's hopefully that can be fixed. Louis Howells, 100 Black Men campaign group there. Yeah, I mean, you watched the footage, you watched, the crowd, and if you looked, you could see it so clearly that there was so, young people. It's all about the youngsters now, is it not? It's all about them coming out and making their voices heard. And, what we do want to do, I mean, Leroy, and I know Claudia are going to agree with me on this, let's keep these marches going on, if you will. Let's protest. Let's keep it peaceful. We need to emphasize the fact that we don't want to create a riot. We do not want to end up like it's been in the US.
We don't even need to emphasize it. We know that history has taught us that organized, peaceful resistance will bring about change. And that's why we need to support Black Lives Matter, because it's without organized, peaceful resistance, change cannot happen. And so we have to support Black Lives Matter and the way that they are moving this forward and this agenda forward. And it does feel different. And we've got to seize this opportunity, because this is the greatest time for change to happen. We cannot go back to business as usual. We've got to see systemic and structural change. And I agree with young people that until that systemic and structural change happens, no one should leave the streets. Everyone should continue to demand that change and that justice. And I, for one, will be showing my solidarity with those who protest in this way. Of course, we must remain safe. Of course, we must keep our physical distance, but we must always maintain our social solidarity, because that is what needs to change as well. The language that is being used.
Let's have a little break there, because we've got now Patrick Vernon going to be coming in. OBE Patrick Vernon, campaigner and commentator. We need to get Louis back in, but we're going to just take a little break so we can get Louis back in as well. And I formally welcome you, Patrick. But let's just take a little break now. You can see some images of what's been happening across the week. Okay, there's some images there. What you did see there also was the memorial service that was held on Thursday, in Minneapolis for George. But Hans Patrick, you've just come in now. Let's go straight on to you, because what we did do with this second section, we were going to be opening up to the people, and it's just loads. So I really would have to come back to Louis a bit later, but I can start to kick off with some of these questions. Thank you, Patrick.
No problem at all.
The first one I'm going to say is Matthew comments, until the British press are scrutinised and penalised in the way they report on Black-related issues, we will never see a change to the mindset of the majority of white people here and abroad. Patrick, would you like to comment on that then?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point, and obviously it's great and it's important that there's lots of solidarity for George Floyd and what's happened in America, but we've got our own history of Black Lives Matter here. I mean, I grew up in Wolverhampton, and one of the very first campaigns I was involved in was the murder of a black man in Next Clothes Shop back in 1987. That's over 30 years ago, Clinton McCurbin. And even 30 years on, there's been no justice for the family at all. And we've got countless and countless of these stories. And the media sometimes, there have been times when the media has played a key role. So a classic example was the Daily Mail. They worked closely with Lawrence family when it came to the murder of Stephen Lawrence in 1993. But apart from those exceptions, most of the media, they rather prefer to do a US story than a UK story, which is really sad.
It's sad, it is sad. Let's bring in Louis. Louis, thank you. Louis Howells. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much. Yeah, okay. That first part, we could have got more out of you, but I do know that you represent 100 Black men and you are a youth mentor, but we need to sort of get some of these questions and comments out by these people that have started from yesterday. So Norman from Basingstoke, and maybe this could be something for you. Norman from Basingstoke asked, why isn't there more being done to root out racist individuals who've managed to join the police force in the UK? Leroy, you put a hint on that, because I believe therein lies the problem with our British police. So root out racist individuals who've managed to join the police force in the UK. Let me ask you this, Louis. You as a young person, and you've got young friends, and you've got people that have been, if you will, stabbed, maybe even under suspicion of you. What is the reaction of young people about how they're being approached, how they're being questioned by British officers?
No, massive levels of frustration, as you can imagine. You know, for myself, as much as, you know, I fall under the age of 30, I wouldn't necessarily classify myself in many ways as young as some people might say, just because I've been doing this area of work for so long, both in a professional capacity and in a voluntary capacity. But the frustration clearly exists. But I think what is always helped in that situation for those young people is when they start to appreciate the fact that there are some ways they can go about conducting themselves if they're in a specific situation where they may be targeted and or approached by those officers that are clearly operating from a point of view that we know is discriminatory. And that is one thing, though. That's about those young people taking that responsibility. But as we know, it shouldn't be their responsibility to have to always conduct themselves in that way, because of the fact that the institution itself needs to be able to make changes. So the frustration definitely exists. I think that's why you do start to get in a lot of local communities that divide, where there then becomes a sense of distrust towards the institution that is the police force. And then once that distrust is in place, it becomes very hard to be able to go about repairing those. What you often see from the police force is they will then try and, if possible, identify people who might be willing to join the force that are from minority ethnic backgrounds, be it Black or Asian or otherwise, but specifically here we're talking about the Black community, in the hope that that representation helps to build bonds and build relationships. But as we know, representation is one thing, but that doesn't necessarily lead to systemic change, because you might be able to externally show me someone that looks like me, but that person has very little decision-making power. That person has very little ability to be able to go about creating the changes that are needed from a policy standpoint in order for those changes to be made. And even then, that person may be someone who is actually being racially discriminated against by their own peers, by their own colleagues. You know, I've actually got a friend who I was speaking to just on Wednesday this week, who, you know, young lady, Black girl, who's become a police officer in the last couple of years. And she says she has to try and call out racism, but she finds it a consistent struggle to try and call that out within that environment where you can overtly see the level of racism that exists. Do you know what I mean? So speaking on behalf of the young people, as I say, the frustration exists, but I think the thing that's actually more scary is the fact that they don't see that as changing, full stop. They don't see there being a change that can be made there regardless. So their main thing is just the distance.
Leroy Logan has a former police superintendent. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. In fact, I've been running a youth leadership program since 2001. It started in Westminster, and Claudia was chair of the Westminster Race Equality Council, if I remember correctly. And that leadership program we set up, called Young Leaders for Safer Cities, has always been a litmus test of how young people perceive. Because we go all across London, and predominantly from deprived areas, and they've always said they feel over-policed and underprotected. And they find some of the black officers can be more draconian than the white officers, because that black officer sometimes wants to fit in with his peer group and seem to be willing. And that's a case of being totally assimilated and groomed within the police unit. And that's one of the drivers behind us setting up the Black Police Association 25 years ago, because we realized that we have a problem with the occupational culture, and it has to be dealt with. And it's fueled by the Police Federation. They're the ones that, similar to what's happening in the States now, when officers are being looked at for discipline or even criminal proceedings, that their Police Federation or their unions are the ones that put pressure on the senior officers to say, listen, there's not a problem, or putting pressure on the judiciary as to what they're supposed to do. So we had to fight against those sort of internal lobbyists and how they influence externally as well. So I know the importance of having that influence that Louis spoke about at the strategic level, and that's why the BPA even now works with the commissioner, not as much as I would like to see, but at least they are there. But it's also a question of those officers of colour who are at the senior level have to speak truth to power. Unfortunately, a lot of them are being manipulated, and they want to acquiesce, but at some stage when the butt's kicked, that's when they step up and say, yes, we have institutional racism or whatever.
Yes.
So we need to make sure that we work with our young people, and that's why the charity we have now with that leadership program called Voyage Youth, we talk about this. Even now in this COVID arena, we're working with them, and also with the Black Lives Matters. And that's one of the reasons why I went to the march on Wednesday, and I saw how the positive vibe that those young people were creating, and the desire to put their health to one side to really focus on this systemic issue that's been left bare for so many years. All I'm going to say is let them do the protesting, but safely, for their health and well-being. Wear the mask, social distancing and everything like that. But I think I would encourage them to make their voices known on all sorts of fronts.
Indeed. And Leroy, in regards to everything that's been said just now, it shouldn't be a deterrent for young people to join the force. So we're not saying young people should be encouraged, from the BAME community to enroll the British Police Force. They have every right to do so. And maybe the more the merrier.
But who
wants to join the police service, they should join it. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on a little bit quickly. Shirley from Manchester asks, the trouble we have in this country is that many Black people who seem to have made it become very quiet and are not involving themselves in political, racial issues such as this. Yet, this is the very time we need their voices. Patrick, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. It's a fair point to make regarding that. And I think some of us have worked in senior management. I've worked in senior management in NHS, but that never stopped me raising my concerns on the impact of violence and what's happened in the community. But I think this is a comparison with us in America. And what's quite clear is you can see a number of high-profile celebrities and business people willing not only to put their money in their pocket I mean, we just heard that Michael Jordan is going to donate $100 million to fighting organisations. But we don't have those same voices here in the UK. And one of the reasons is we haven't got a collective energy and a collective leadership that supports each other. So often it's always the individual. So I've known Leroy for years, I've known Claudia for years, and it's just the same voices that are always fighting the causes. And what we need to do, and I'm hoping for this Black Lives Matter resurgence in the UK, that more voices will come out on the front line, put their head above the parapet, and that includes senior people in political life, in public life. We expect them, it'd be great if they could get involved more. Some did get involved during the Windrush scandal, but not enough. And we need to have a platform so they can feel confident that they can speak out, and we will support each other.
I think there's, if you don't mind me jumping in there, Pam, if I can just add to that, just to reinforce something Patrick said, which is what maybe causes that situation is potentially the idea that because we are so often taught that in order to be able to succeed in life, it's about what you do as an individual living in a quote unquote meritocratic society, which allows you to then be able to thrive and prosper on a personal level without understanding that you operate within a collective context. So, if we actually break down what racism is, technically racism cannot exist on an individual level because racism is a group construct. Therefore, meaning if you understand that racism exists on a group level, you have to help I'm going to speak from the viewpoint of young people because, for example, I run 2 businesses, one of which operates in the education sector, one of which does a lot of work around youth and community engagement for charities, social enterprises and corporates. And I volunteer with 100 Black Men of London, and I'm a trustee of a small youth charity doing mentoring in a different context. But regardless, what I try to say is that if from a young age, people are brought up to understand that, yes, it's important for you to thrive on an individual level, but everything contributes to the group to which you are a part of. And that collective consciousness and awareness of that should allow them to appreciate that no matter what I am doing, I am not only representative of, but I am here to go about operating in such a context that ensures that my group can thrive. Now, if that hasn't happened for those people who are now in those positions of power, influence in the public domain, etc., they are not necessarily even aware or understanding of how they can go about making an impact right now. Because they might even have that concern of, if I speak, will that hinder my current position, stuff like that, which we could argue is a very selfish way to operate. And I would say most of them are not ignorant, but there is a concern about, if I do this, what impact would it have? John Boyega made a phenomenal speech earlier this week. What was the key part everybody remembers? We all remember the part where he said, I don't know if I'll have a job after this.
Lose his job.
That concern. He should never really have that concern because we should have such an infrastructure that ensures he is supported full stop. However, he knows he operates in a group context. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Claudia, I've got one for you. Directly ready, I think this is because of you. Jess from Wolverhampton asks, can we start strongly lobbying government to implement Black history into the school curriculum so that white young people can truly understand what we as a race have had to put up with and why we come out in our masses when something like this happens?
The simple response to that question is, which is a repetitive question, is yes. We don't have to wait till we're inside of government to do so. That is something that, like the other questions, however, are focused on the individual. Should there be more Black police officers? Yes. Should more people who are Black in positions speak out? Yes. Should we have more education of individuals in schools and other places? Yes. But these are individual responses that focus on the individual. What we're talking about in terms of the change that is required is systemic and structural, and therefore you've got to tackle the root problem. It is not about Black faces in high places that are going to bring about change. We must understand this. We cannot leave the legacy and future of our lives into waiting until white people become educated about what is going on. This massive movement that is now happening on our streets is a catalyst for change. We need to build on that in terms of the systemic and structural changes that are necessary. For example, we have to shout loudly and call for the UK to ban the sale of anti-riot equipment, including tear gas, rubber bullets, riot shields and weapons that are now being used disgracefully, supplied to the US, being used brutally to clamp down on those protesting peacefully in terms of state-sanctioned racism. We must call this out. This is what you call structural change that is necessary. The UK government must condemn the racist actions of Trump. If we remain silent, then of course that is what happens in terms of structural racism, and we must challenge it wherever it appears in the world. And if we, this is not about what we do as individuals. This is about a systematic change and structural change that is necessary. And it's therefore it's right for us in the UK to understand we are not immune from the disease of state-sanctioned racism, and therefore we as Black people, we know that we disproportionately suffer at the hands of the criminal justice system, but we disproportionately suffer at every nexus of society, and that must change, because we've seen already that it's not that who really matters and what really needs to change in society. So we've got to think 38 feet above ground instead of 1 feet above ground. We've got to really get up off our knees actually and stand up and know that we can go forward with the right policies that are necessary to bring about change, but we've got to demand it. We've got to enable that. We've got to understand what we're demanding, how we're demanding it, and who we need to support. But it's not about just having Black faces in high places. That's not going to bring about the change that we need.
We've got to round up, but I've just got, because so many of them are to do with the protests and the pandemic. So I've just picked one of them. So you guys, you have to make it short and brief. But Dom from Bristol, I'm going to use your question, Dom, because it's short and sweet. Are the organisers rarely thinking about the coronavirus when they organise these rallies? Brief from each, please.
Well, can I just say, I went to the march on Wednesday and I didn't see any stewards or any sort of information to say, please keep your social distancing, if you've got masks, or even assisting with masks. The only time I saw that sort of health consciousness was when we marched from Hyde Park to Parliament Square, and then we went up to Trafalgar Square before there was a bit of conflict at Downing Street. And I saw some people without tabards to say the stewards, they had some hand sanitizers and they were giving someone, squirting a little in your hand and that was the only time. And then I didn't see the police engaging with any stewards. I didn't see any stewards, as I said. So I really think that if you're going to do these sort of protests, doing it peacefully, but doing it healthily is the key.
Thank you, Claudia.
It is what we demonstrate. I mean, I was out in Parliament on Wednesday when the peaceful demonstrators arrived with their masks, many of whom carrying sanitizer. I went out with my mask. I had a sanitizer in my hand too. We've got to recognize these events. This is really what you call policing by consent. The people outnumber the police. The police can't manage these events like this. This is what you call UK policing by consent in action. What we need to actually be calling out, what we really need to be worried about, is how the police are able to use riot-clad horses as weapons against peaceful protesters. That's what we need to really be calling out. That is against the type of policing is against the concept of policing by consent. We need to focus our energies in the right places. At the end of the day, the protest that we're making on the streets today is almost unstoppable, but people are wearing their masks, they're carrying their hand sanitizers, and they're they are marching for justice, and
Thank
that
you.
deserves our full support.
Thank you, Claudia. Patrick.
Events in Hackney organised by Stumps of Racism, and both those events took place outside Hackney Town Hall. There were about 600 people, not as many as people obviously in central London, but everyone, there were lots of families there, there were lots of local people there, and all of them had their masks, all of them were practicing social distancing, and all the speakers who were using our tannoys and loudspeakers had proper equipment to use. So I think the organisers have taken responsibility so we can actually march and demonstrate peacefully.
Excellent. Last one from you, Louis. Please make it brief.
Yeah, I mean, again, similar, just to echo what's been said, I think, there is also a level of personal responsibility that has to be taken. And I think every single protester has, well, I say every single, that would obviously be a sweeping statement, but I think the large majority have taken it upon themselves to do what they need to do as it relates to wearing masks, as it relates to socially distancing where possible. Of course, we're seeing videos where maybe once they've actually arrived at a destination to which they want to be able to make the main demonstration, the crowds look a bit more bunched, but I don't think that people are doing that unnecessarily and for a sustained period of time to the point where they're ignoring the health guidelines. But I also think, to echo something that Claudia was saying, which is the fact that at the end of the day, this has to be prioritized. Do you know what I mean? Like, unfortunately, this is happening in the midst of a pandemic, but this absolutely has to be prioritized. They have to be present and they have to be able to make demonstrations. So they're going to do as best they can, but that must be prioritized.
Thank you so much. And I hope that answered all of you, the guys that questioned about the coronavirus and the rallies. Thank you ever so much. So thank you, Leroy Logan. Thank you, Claudia Webbe. Thank you, Louis Howell. And thank you, Patrick Vernon. Thank you ever so much for your time out with us. See you and take care.